The wind had been blowing cold all morning, but Katherine Jennings had no idea that by afternoon she would be fighting for her life in a blizzard that would change everything she thought she knew about survival and love. She had left Prescott, Arizona 3 days earlier with her wagon loaded with supplies and her heart heavy with grief, heading toward her sister's homestead near the New Mexico border. The year was 1887, and the January weather had been unpredictable, shifting from clear skies to threatening clouds within hours. Katherine had been warned by several shopkeepers in Prescott to wait out the winter before making the journey, but she had received word that her sister Emma was sick and needed help with the children. At 23 years old, Katherine had already buried a husband and lost a baby, and she was not about to lose her only remaining family without at least trying to reach her. The wagon had been making strange noises since yesterday afternoon, a grinding sound that seemed to come from somewhere underneath. But Katherine had pressed on, hoping it would hold together until she reached the small settlement of Coolidge where she planned to rest and resupply. She had passed through Coolidge once before, 2 years ago, when she and her late husband Daniel had been traveling to Prescott to start their new life. It had been a dusty little town then, barely more than a few buildings clustered around a general store and a saloon, but it had seemed like a beacon of civilization in the vast wilderness. Now, as the wind picked up and the first snowflakes began to fall, Katherine realized with growing dread that she had miscalculated the distance. The wagon lurched violently to one side, and she heard a sharp crack that made her heart sink. She pulled hard on the reins, bringing the 2 horses to a halt, and climbed down to inspect the damage. The rear axle had splintered, and the wheel was canted at an impossible angle. Even with her limited knowledge of wagon mechanics, Katherine knew this was not something she could fix herself. She looked around at the landscape, seeing nothing but rolling hills covered in brown grass and the occasional scrub pine. The snow was falling faster now, thick white flakes that stuck to her coat and hair. She had no idea how far she was from Coolidge, and the trail behind her had already begun to disappear under the accumulating snow. Katherine felt the first real stab of fear pierce through her determination. She had faced hardship before, had buried loved ones and survived losses that would have broken many women. But she had never been truly alone in the wilderness with a storm bearing down on her. She unhitched the horses and led them to the lee side of the wagon, hoping to provide them with some shelter from the wind. Then she gathered what supplies she could reach and began to prepare for what might be a long, cold wait. She had blankets and food, a small amount of water, and her rifle. If she was lucky, someone would come along the trail before the storm got too bad. If she was not lucky, well, she tried not to think about that. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The storm intensified, the wind howling across the plains with a ferocity that Katherine had never experienced before. She huddled under the wagon with the horses tied nearby, wrapped in every blanket she owned, and watched the world turn white. The cold seeped through her layers of clothing, making her fingers and toes ache. She tried to stay awake, knowing that falling asleep in these conditions could be fatal, but exhaustion pulled at her consciousness like a weight. She must have dozed off despite her best efforts, because she came awake with a start when she heard a sound that did not belong to the storm. It was the whinny of a horse, different from her own animals, and it came from somewhere close by. Katherine struggled out from under the wagon, her limbs stiff with cold, and peered through the swirling snow. At first she saw nothing, but then a shape materialized out of the whiteness, a man on horseback leading a pack mule. He was tall in the saddle, wrapped in a heavy coat with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. As he drew closer, Katherine could make out more details. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a striking shade of gray-blue. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features that spoke of determination and strength. He pulled his horse to a stop a few yards from her wagon and looked at her with an expression of surprise and concern. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and steady despite the howling wind, "you cannot stay out here. This storm is going to get worse before it gets better." "My wagon broke down," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "The axle is cracked. I cannot move it." The man dismounted and walked over to inspect the damage, his movements confident and purposeful. He crouched down beside the broken axle, running his gloved hands over the splintered wood, and Katherine saw him shake his head. "This is bad," he said, "but not impossible to fix. The question is whether we have time before we both freeze to death out here." "I have tools," Katherine offered. "Whatever you need." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something like a smile cross his features. "You have spirit, I will give you that. Most women would be in hysterics by now. My name is Yates Preston. I have a small ranch about 10 miles south of Coolidge." "I was heading back there when I saw your wagon, Katherine Jennings," she said. "I am trying to reach my sister near the New Mexico border. She is sick." Yates nodded, his expression serious. "Then we will get your wagon fixed and get you moving again. But first, let me make sure you do not die of cold while I work. Do you have any way to make a fire?" Katherine showed him her supplies, and together they managed to get a small fire started using some deadwood she had collected earlier and a sheltered spot on the other side of the wagon. It was not much, but it provided enough warmth to keep them from freezing while Yates set to work on the axle. Katherine watched him as he worked, marveling at the efficiency of his movements. He stripped off his heavy coat despite the cold, needing the freedom of movement, and she could see the strength in his arms and shoulders as he used her tools to brace the broken axle with pieces of wood cut from a spare board she had been carrying. "Where did you learn to do this?" Katherine asked, moving closer to hold a lantern so he could see better. "My father was a wheelwright before he came west," Yates said, not looking up from his work. "He taught me everything he knew before he died. That was 10 years ago, but the skills stayed with me." "I am sorry about your father," Katherine said softly. "It was a long time ago," Yates replied. "He would be glad to know his teaching is keeping someone alive today." The work was slow and painstaking, made more difficult by the cold and the wind that seemed determined to blow out their fire and bury them in snow. Katherine did what she could to help, holding tools and boards steady while Yates hammered and tied and braced. Her hands were numb despite her gloves, and she could see that Yates was also suffering from the cold, though he never complained. There was something deeply reassuring about his presence, a sense of calm competence that made Katherine feel safer than she had since leaving Prescott. After what felt like hours, Yates finally stood back and examined his work. "It will not win any prizes for craftsmanship," he said, "but it should hold long enough to get you to Coolidge. After that, you will need a proper repair." "Thank you," Katherine said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." Yates looked at her, and in the flickering light of the fire, Katherine saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. It was not just concern or kindness, though both were there. It was something deeper, a spark of connection that seemed to bridge the space between them despite the fact that they had only just met. "We need to move now," Yates said, breaking the moment. "The storm is getting worse, and if we wait much longer, we will not be able to see the trail at all." They hitched Katherine's horses back to the wagon, and Yates insisted on driving while Katherine rode beside him on the bench. His own horse and mule were tied to the back of the wagon, following along as they began the slow journey toward Coolidge. The wind had reached a fever pitch, and the snow was so thick that Katherine could barely see Yates even though he was sitting right next to her. She had no idea how he was managing to follow the trail, but somehow he kept them moving forward, guiding the horses with a steady hand and a calm voice that cut through the chaos of the storm. Katherine found herself studying his profile as he drove, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed in concentration as he peered through the snow. She wondered about his life, about the ranch he had mentioned, and what had brought him to this harsh, beautiful country. She wondered if he was married, and then felt embarrassed by the thought. She had no business thinking about such things, especially not now, when survival was still far from certain. "How much farther?" she asked, having to shout to be heard over the wind. "Hard to say in this weather," Yates shouted back. "Maybe 5 miles, maybe less. There is a line of cottonwoods that marks the edge of town. Once we reach those, we are safe." Katherine nodded and pulled her blankets tighter around herself. The cold was like nothing she had ever experienced, a brutal, bone-deep chill that made every breath painful. She could see ice forming on Yates's beard and eyebrows, and she knew she must look just as frozen. The horses were struggling too, their heads down against the wind, their breath coming out in great clouds of steam. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the whiteout. Katherine had no idea if they had been traveling for minutes or hours when Yates suddenly straightened up and pointed ahead. "There," he said. "The cottonwoods." Katherine could barely make out the dark shapes of the trees through the snow, but they were there, solid and real. A few minutes later, buildings began to appear around them, the dark bulk of the general store, the smaller shape of what might have been a boarding house. Yates guided the wagon down what Katherine assumed was the main street and pulled up in front of a long, low building with a covered porch. "This is the boarding house," Yates said. "Mrs. Chen runs it. She will have a room for you and a warm meal. I will see to your horses and make sure they are properly cared for." "Please, let me help," Katherine said, but Yates shook his head. "You need to get inside and warm up," he said firmly. "I will take care of everything out here. Go on now, before you freeze solid." Katherine wanted to argue, but she could barely feel her feet anymore, and she knew he was right. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs nearly giving out under her, and stumbled toward the door of the boarding house. Behind her, she heard Yates calling to the horses as he led them away, and she felt a pang of something she could not quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else, something that made her want to turn back and make sure he was all right. The door opened before she could knock, and a small, sturdy woman with graying black hair and kind eyes pulled her inside. "Good heavens, child, you look half frozen," the woman said in accented English. Come in. I am Mrs. Chen. You must be the lady Mr. Preston found on the trail." Katherine blinked in confusion. "How did you know?" "He rode ahead while you were still a ways out," Mrs. Chen explained, already bustling Katherine toward a chair near a roaring fire. "Told me to get a room ready and have hot food waiting. Now you sit there and do not move while I fetch you some tea." Katherine sank into the chair, feeling the warmth of the fire begin to penetrate her frozen clothing. She felt tears prick at her eyes, tears of relief and exhaustion, and something else she could not quite identify. She had been so close to death out there, and now she was safe, thanks to a stranger who had risked his own life to help her. Mrs. Chen returned with a cup of steaming tea and a thick quilt, which she wrapped around Katherine's shoulders. "Drink this slowly," she instructed. "It will help warm you from the inside. Mr. Preston will be back soon. He is a good man, that one, finest rancher in these parts and as decent as they come." "He saved my life," Katherine said quietly. He would say he was just doing what anyone would do, Mrs. Chen replied. But not everyone would have gone out in that storm, and not everyone would have had the skill to fix your wagon. You were lucky he found you. Katherine sipped the tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. She could hear the wind still howling outside, rattling the windows and making the building creak, and she shuddered to think what would have happened if Yates had not come along when he did. She would have frozen to death under that wagon, alone and afraid, and no one would have found her until spring. The door opened again, bringing a gust of cold air and snow, and Yates stepped inside. He looked even more frozen than Katherine had been, his face red with cold and his clothing stiff with ice. Mrs. Chen immediately descended on him, scolding him in rapid Cantonese while pulling him toward the fire and another chair. "I am fine, Mrs. Chen," Yates protested, but the older woman would not hear it. "You sit down right now, Yates Preston, or I will tell your mother what a foolish boy you are," she said. "Riding out in a blizzard without proper provisions. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that someone might need help," Yates said, but he sat down obediently. His eyes met Katherine's across the fire, and she saw him smile slightly. "How are you feeling, Miss Jennings?" "Much better, thanks to you," Katherine said. "And please call me Katherine. After everything you have done, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Katherine, then," Yates said, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "And you should call me Yates. Miss Jennings makes me sound like a schoolmarm." Katherine laughed, and was surprised by how good it felt. She had not laughed in months, not since before Daniel's death, and certainly not in the past few terrifying hours. But something about Yates's dry humor and the safety of the warm room made laughter bubble up inside her. Mrs. Chen brought them both bowls of hot stew and fresh bread, and they ate in comfortable silence, the warmth of the food and the fire gradually bringing feeling back to their frozen limbs. Katherine found herself stealing glances at Yates when she thought he was not looking, noticing details she had missed before. The way his hands moved with careful precision as he ate, the slight crinkle around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, the way he thanked Mrs. Chen with genuine warmth and respect. "The storm should blow itself out by tomorrow," Yates said after he had finished eating. "When it does, I will take you to the blacksmith and have him look at your wagon. He can do a proper repair that will hold all the way to New Mexico." "I cannot thank you enough," Katherine said. "If there is any way I can repay you—" "There is no debt," Yates said firmly. "But if you want to do something for me, you can promise to be more careful. This country does not forgive mistakes, especially not in winter." "I will," Katherine said. "I should have waited in Prescott like everyone told me to, but my sister is sick and I was worried." "Family is important," Yates said. "I understand that, but you will not do your sister any good if you freeze to death before you reach her." Katherine nodded, knowing he was right. She looked down at her hands, which were still trembling slightly from the cold and the shock of what she had been through. "My husband used to say I was too stubborn for my own good," she said quietly. "I suppose he was right." "Used to?" Yates asked gently. "He died last year," Katherine said. "Pneumonia. We had only been married for 3 years." "I am sorry," Yates said, and the sincerity in his voice made Katherine look up at him. She saw genuine compassion in his eyes, not pity, and that made all the difference. "It was a difficult time," Katherine admitted. "But I am trying to move forward. My sister is all the family I have left, which is why I needed to reach her." Yates nodded slowly. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said. "Childbirth. The baby died too. For a long time I thought I would never feel whole again." Katherine felt her heart contract with sympathy. "I am so sorry, Yates. I cannot imagine how painful that must have been." "It was the hardest thing I ever went through," Yates said. But time helps, and work. I threw myself into building up the ranch, into making something that would last. It gave me a purpose when I thought I had none left." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had both known loss and survived it, and Katherine felt a connection forming between them that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. It was the recognition of kindred spirits, two souls who had been tested by life and had not broken. Mrs. Chen appeared again, this time carrying blankets and pillows. "The guest room is ready for you, Katherine," she said. "And Yates, I made up the back room for you as well. You are not riding back to your ranch in this storm." "Yes, madam," Yates said with a slight grin. "I would not dream of arguing with you." Katherine stood up, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The warmth and the food and the emotional release of being safe had left her drained. "Thank you again, Yates," she said, "for everything." "Sleep well, Katherine," Yates said. "Tomorrow we will get your wagon fixed and you can continue your journey." Katherine followed Mrs. Chen to a small but comfortable room at the back of the boarding house. The bed looked impossibly inviting, piled high with quilts and pillows, and Katherine barely managed to remove her boots and outer clothing before crawling under the covers. She was asleep within minutes, but her last conscious thought was of Yates, of his steady gray-blue eyes and the quiet strength that radiated from him like heat from a fire. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting from somewhere nearby. For a moment, Katherine was disoriented, unable to remember where she was, but then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. The broken wagon, the blizzard, Yates appearing out of the snow like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. She dressed quickly and went out into the main room of the boarding house, where she found Mrs. Chen cooking breakfast and Yates sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He looked up when she entered and smiled, and Katherine felt her heart do that strange flutter again. "Good morning," he said. "You look much better than you did last night." "I feel better," Katherine said, pouring herself a cup of coffee and sitting down across from him. "The storm has stopped." "A few hours ago," Yates confirmed. "I have already been to see the blacksmith. He said he can have your wagon repaired by this afternoon if we get it over to his shop." "That fast?" Katherine asked in surprise. "He is good at what he does," Yates said, "and I told him it was important. You want to reach your sister as soon as possible." Katherine felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, mixed with something else, something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. Of course Yates wanted to help her get on her way quickly. He had his own life to get back to, his own ranch to run. She had no right to expect anything more from him than what he had already given. But as the morning progressed, and they worked together to get her wagon to the blacksmith shop, Katherine found herself wishing that circumstances were different. Yates was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that made her laugh and a thoughtfulness that suggested he actually listened to what she said. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, and the land he was slowly building into something productive. He spoke of the challenges of ranching in Arizona, of the dry summers and the harsh winters, but also of the beauty of the country and the satisfaction of creating something with his own hands. Katherine found herself telling him things she had not told anyone, about her marriage to Daniel, and how she had loved him but also felt stifled by his need to protect her from everything, about losing their baby, and how that loss had created a distance between them that they had never fully bridged before his death. She told him about her sister Emma and her brother-in-law Thomas, about their 4 children and the homestead they were trying to build on land that seemed determined to defeat them. "They sound like good people," Yates said as they watched the blacksmith work on the wagon axle. "They are," Katherine agreed. "But Thomas is not strong and Emma has always been delicate. I worry about them out there all alone." "Will you stay with them?" Yates asked, and Katherine thought she detected something in his voice, a note of concern or perhaps hope. "I do not know," Katherine admitted. "I suppose it depends on how sick Emma is and whether they need me. I do not have anywhere else to go, really. I sold our house in Prescott to pay debts after Daniel died." "You could stay here," Yates said, and then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean in Coolidge. It is a small town, but it is growing. Mrs. Chen is always looking for help at the boarding house, and the general store needs someone who can read and write well. There are opportunities for someone like you." Katherine looked at him, trying to read his expression. Was he just being kind, or was there something more behind the suggestion? She wanted to ask, but found herself afraid of the answer. "I will think about it," she said finally. "But first I need to reach Emma and make sure she is all right." The blacksmith finished the repair by early afternoon, and Yates insisted on checking the whole wagon over to make sure everything else was in working order. Katherine watched him work, marveling again at his competence and the care he took with even the smallest details. When he was satisfied that the wagon was safe, he helped her load her supplies back on and hitch up the horses. "The trail to New Mexico should be clear now," he said. "But you need to be careful. There could be ice in places, and more storms could blow in at any time." "I will be careful," Katherine promised. "Yates, I do not know how to thank you for everything you have done." "You do not need to thank me," Yates said, but his eyes were serious as he looked at her. "Katherine, I know we only met yesterday, but I feel like I need to say something. If things do not work out with your sister, or if you ever need help, my ranch is only 10 miles south of here. Anyone in town can give you directions. I mean it when I say you would be welcome." Katherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That means more to me than you know," she said softly. "Yates, you are a good man. Your wife was lucky to have you, and whoever you end up with in the future will be lucky too." Something flickered across Yates's face, an expression Katherine could not quite read. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I have already met her and I am just too scared to say anything." Katherine's heart began to pound. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, someone called out Yates's name from down the street. They both turned to see a man on horseback riding toward them, waving urgently. "Yates, we have got a problem," the man called out as he drew closer. "Some of your cattle broke through the fence during the storm and scattered. We need help rounding them up before they wander too far." Yates muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse, then turned back to Katherine. "I have to go," he said. "But what I said before, I meant it. Think about it, Katherine." "I will," Katherine said, and then, because she felt like she might never get another chance, she reached out and touched his arm. "Yates, I am glad you found me yesterday, not just because you saved my life, but because I got to meet you." Yates looked down at her hand on his arm, and when he raised his eyes to hers, Katherine saw something in them that made her breath catch. "I am glad, too," he said quietly. Then he gently covered her hand with his own, squeezed once, and let go. "Be safe, Katherine." She watched him ride away with the other rancher, feeling a strange sense of loss that seemed out of proportion to the brief time she had known him. Then she climbed up onto the wagon seat, took up the reins, and started her horses moving down the trail toward New Mexico and her sister's homestead. The journey took 3 more days, and Katherine thought about Yates during every mile of it. She replayed their conversations in her mind, analyzing every word and gesture, trying to understand what had happened between them. She had been attracted to him from the start. She could admit that now, drawn to his quiet strength and his kindness. But it was more than attraction. There had been a connection, a sense of recognition that went soul deep. She had felt understood by him in a way she had never felt with Daniel, loved as he had been. when she finally reached Emma's homestead, she found her sister much sicker than the letter had indicated. Emma was in bed with a fever that came and went, too weak to care for her children or help with the household chores. Thomas was doing his best, but he was overwhelmed, trying to manage the farm and the children and his sick wife all at once. The children ranged from 9 years old down to 2, and they were clearly scared and confused by their mother's illness. Katherine threw herself into helping, taking over the cooking and cleaning and child care while Thomas focused on the farm work and Emma's care. The days were long and exhausting, but Katherine was glad to be useful, glad to have a purpose beyond her own grief and confusion. In the evenings, after the children were in bed and Emma was sleeping, Katherine would sit by the fire and think about Yates, wondering what he was doing and whether he ever thought about her. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Emma's fever finally broke and she began to recover, slowly regaining her strength. Katherine continued to help, but as her sister improved, she began to feel restless. Emma's family was intact, whole in a way that Katherine's own family would never be again. She loved them dearly, but being here reminded her every day of what she had lost and what she might never have. One evening, as she was washing dishes after supper, Emma came up beside her and took the plate from her hands. "You have been thinking about going back," Emma said. It was not a question. Katherine looked at her sister in surprise. "How did you know?" "I can see it in your eyes," Emma said gently. "You get this distant look like you are somewhere else. Is it that cowboy, the one who saved you in the blizzard?" Katherine felt her cheeks heat. "I mentioned him once," she protested. "You have mentioned him more than once," Emma said with a slight smile. "And the way you talk about him, Katherine, I have never heard you sound like that before, not even when you talked about Daniel." Katherine set down the dish towel and sighed. "I do not know what I feel," she admitted. "I only knew him for a day and a night. It is ridiculous to think there could be anything real between us based on so little time." "Is it?" Emma asked. "Mama always said that when you meet the right person, you know it in your bones. Time is just time. The heart knows what it knows." "But what if I am wrong?" Katherine asked. "What if I go back and he does not feel the same way? What if I am just building up something in my mind that was never really there?" "Then you will know," Emma said, "and you can move on." "But Katherine, if you do not go back, you will always wonder. And I do not want you to spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Katherine looked at her sister, seeing the wisdom in her eyes, and felt something settle in her chest. Emma was right. She needed to know, one way or another, whether what she had felt with Yates was real or just the product of extreme circumstances and emotional vulnerability. "I will stay until you are completely well," Katherine said. "But then, yes, I think I need to go back." "I am already completely well," Emma said firmly. "And you are leaving tomorrow morning. Thomas and I have already discussed it. We are grateful for everything you have done, but we can manage now. And you deserve a chance at happiness." Katherine felt tears sting her eyes. She hugged her sister tightly, feeling the love and support that had always been there between them. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, Katherine packed her wagon and said goodbye to Emma and her family. The children cried and begged her to stay, and Katherine promised she would visit again soon. Thomas shook her hand and thanked her for everything she had done, and Emma hugged her one more time and whispered, "Be brave. Follow your heart." The journey back to Coolidge took 4 days, and Katherine used every hour of it to try to figure out what she was going to say to Yates when she saw him again. She rehearsed speeches in her mind, trying out different ways to tell him how she felt, but they all sounded awkward or presumptuous. What if he had not meant what she thought he meant when he said he might have already met the woman he wanted? What if he had been talking about someone else entirely? By the time she reached Coolidge, Katherine was a bundle of nerves. She went straight to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, hoping to clean up before seeking out Yates, but Mrs. Chen took one look at her and immediately started talking. "He has been here 3 times," Mrs. Chen announced without preamble, "asking if I had heard from you, if I knew whether you were coming back. That man has been like a lost puppy." Katherine felt hope bloom in her chest. "He has. Every week, regular as clockwork," Mrs. Chen confirmed. "I told him you would come back when you were ready, but I do not think he believed me. You should go to him now, child. Put him out of his misery." "I need to wash up first," Katherine protested, but Mrs. Chen shook her head. "You look fine. Now go before I push you out the door myself." Katherine laughed despite her nerves and went back to her wagon, following Mrs. Chen's directions. She headed south out of town, looking for the landmarks that would lead her to Yates's ranch. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Katherine found herself struck once again by the beauty of this harsh country. She found the ranch just as the last light was fading from the sky. It was larger than she had expected, with a sturdy house and several outbuildings clustered around a yard. She could see cattle grazing in fields that stretched out toward the distant mountains, and smoke rising from the chimney of the house. As she pulled her wagon into the yard, a dog came running out, barking excitedly, and a moment later Yates appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at her, and Katherine could not read his expression in the fading light. Then he was moving, striding across the yard with long, purposeful steps, and Katherine climbed down from the wagon to meet him. They stopped a few feet apart, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Yates said, his voice rough, "You came back." "I came back," Katherine confirmed. "My sister is better. She does not need me anymore." "And you?" Yates asked. "What do you need, Katherine?" Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I need to know if what I felt between us was real," she said. "I need to know if you felt it too, or if I have been building castles in the air for the past month." Yates took a step closer. "It was real," he said. "Katherine, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day you left. I told myself I was being a fool, that you would never come back, that I had no right to hope for anything after knowing you for such a short time. But I hoped anyway." "I hope too," Katherine whispered. "Yates, I have been married before, and I thought I knew what love was supposed to feel like. But what I felt with you in just one day was stronger than anything I felt in 3 years of marriage. That terrifies me and excites me in equal measure." "I know exactly what you mean," Yates said, and now he was close enough that Katherine could see the emotion in his eyes. "When I lost my wife, I thought that was it for me. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, and I was all right with that. But then I met you, and suddenly I wanted things I thought I would never want again: a partner, a companion, someone to share my life with." "Yates," Katherine said, and her voice broke on his name. "I am scared. What if we are wrong? What if this is just circumstance and emotion and we are making a mistake? Then we will be wrong together," Yates said. He reached out and took her hands in his, and Katherine felt the warmth and strength of his grip anchor her. "Katherine, I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am just asking you to stay. Give us a chance to see if this is real. If it is not, you can leave and I will never hold it against you. But if it is, if this is what I think it might be, then we would be fools to walk away from it." Katherine looked up at him, at this strong, kind man who had saved her life and then captured her heart, and felt certainty wash over her like sunlight. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to give us a chance." The smile that broke across Yates's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He pulled her into his arms, and Katherine went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other as the stars began to appear overhead, and Katherine felt something in her chest that had been locked tight for a year finally begin to open. The next few months passed in a blur of work and discovery. Katherine took a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house and got a job helping at the general store, but she spent most of her free time at Yates's ranch. She learned about cattle and horses, about branding and roundups, and all the 1,000 tasks that went into running a ranch. Yates was a patient teacher, showing her how to ride better and how to handle the cattle without spooking them. In turn, Katherine helped him with the parts of ranching he was less good at: the bookkeeping and the correspondence with buyers, the mending and the cooking for the ranch hands who worked for him during busy seasons. They talked endlessly, sharing stories of their pasts and their dreams for the future. Yates told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's wheelwright shop, and how they had lost everything when a fire destroyed the business. He told her about coming west to make a new start, about meeting his first wife Sarah and building the ranch from nothing. He spoke of Sarah with love and sadness, but without the crushing grief Katherine had seen in him at first, and she understood that he had truly healed from that loss. Katherine told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had died in a cholera epidemic when she was 18, about marrying Daniel because she had been alone and scared and he had seemed safe. She admitted that she had never really been in love with Daniel, that she had cared for him but never felt the kind of passion or connection she had read about in books. She told him about losing the baby and how it had felt like a punishment for not loving her husband enough, even though she knew that was not rational. "You deserve to be happy," Yates told her one evening as they sat on the porch of his house, watching the sunset. "You deserve to be loved the way you should be loved, with all the passion and devotion you are capable of giving back." "So do you," Katherine said, turning to look at him. "Yates, I think I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I started falling the moment I saw you riding out of that blizzard like some kind of angel sent to save me." Yates reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I fell in love with you when you stood there in the snow, half frozen and exhausted, but still determined to take care of your horses and your supplies before yourself. I looked at you and thought, now there is a woman worth knowing, worth loving." "Then what are we waiting for?" Katherine asked. "Why are we taking things slowly when we both know what we want?" "Because I want to do this right," Yates said. "I want to court you properly, Katherine. I want everyone in this town to know that you are not just some woman I took in out of pity or convenience. I want them to know that you are the woman I choose, the woman I love, and I want you to have the courtship and the wedding you deserve." Katherine felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were happy tears this time. "All right," she said. "Court me properly, Yates Preston. But do not take too long about it, because I am not a patient woman." Yates laughed and pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I will try to move quickly," he promised, "but there are certain traditions that must be observed." He was true to his word. For the next 2 months, Yates courted Katherine with old-fashioned determination. He brought her flowers he had ridden miles to find, wildflowers from the mountain meadows that bloomed in the spring sunshine. He took her on picnics to beautiful spots on his land, places where they could sit and talk and watch the hawks circle overhead. He brought her to church every Sunday and introduced her to everyone as the woman he intended to marry, making his intentions clear to the whole town. Katherine bloomed under his attention like a flower after rain. She had never felt so cherished, so desired, so completely seen and understood by another person. Yates made her laugh with his dry humor and touched her heart with his thoughtfulness. He listened when she talked about her dreams and fears, and he shared his own with equal openness. They began to plan a future together, talking about expanding the ranch and maybe starting a family, about building something that would last beyond their lifetimes. On a warm evening in late May, exactly 6 months after he had found her stranded in the blizzard, Yates asked Katherine to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of his ranch house, watching the stars come out, and Yates suddenly dropped to one knee in front of her. "Katherine Jennings," he said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. "You came into my life when I thought I was finished with love, and you showed me that the heart has an infinite capacity to heal and hope. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Katherine said without hesitation. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you. I love you with all my heart, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else." Yates slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. Then he stood up and pulled Katherine into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them for months. Katherine kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that moment, all her love and hope and joy. They were married 6 weeks later, on a bright July morning in the small church in Coolidge. Emma and her family made the journey from New Mexico to attend, and Mrs. Chen cried happy tears as she watched Katherine walk down the aisle in a simple white dress she had sewn herself. Yates stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Katherine's face as she approached, and when the reverend pronounced them man and wife, the joy on his face was brighter than the sun streaming through the windows. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward. A picnic on the grounds of Yates's ranch with music and dancing and more food than Katherine had ever seen in one place. She danced with Yates, with her brother-in-law Thomas, with half the men in town. But it was Yates she kept coming back to, drawn to him like a magnet to north. As the sun began to set, and the guests started to leave, Yates took Katherine's hand and led her away from the party, toward the house that was now theirs together. They stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the land that spread before them, at the mountains in the distance, and the cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, slipping his arm around Katherine's waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine said honestly. 6 months ago I was lost and alone and I thought my life was essentially over, and now I have you and this life, and a future that looks brighter than anything I could have imagined." "I feel the same way," Yates said. "You saved me, Katherine, just as much as I saved you that day in the blizzard. You brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever." "We saved each other," Katherine said, turning to face him. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, looking into those gray-blue eyes that had captured her heart from the first moment. "And we will keep saving each other, every day, for the rest of our lives." Yates kissed her then, a long, slow kiss full of promise and passion, and Katherine felt her heart swell with a love so big it almost hurt. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, this sense of completeness and belonging. Not just safety or companionship, but true partnership, the kind of love that made you stronger and braver and more yourself than you could ever be alone. They went inside together, closing the door on the outside world, and began their life as husband and wife. The first year of their marriage was both harder and more wonderful than Katherine had expected. Ranching was difficult work, especially during the hot Arizona summers when water was scarce and the cattle were restless. There were times when Katherine thought she could not lift another bale of hay or mend another fence post, when the endless cycle of work and worry seemed overwhelming. But Yates was always there beside her, his strength and determination never wavering, and together they managed to not just survive but thrive. Katherine threw herself into making the ranch house a home, using what little money they could spare to buy fabric for curtains and seeds for a vegetable garden. She learned to cook hearty meals for the ranch hands, to preserve vegetables and fruit for the winter, to manage a household in conditions that would have defeated her a year earlier. She discovered she had a talent for working with horses, a gentleness and patience that allowed her to train even the most skittish animals, and Yates started letting her handle the breaking and training of their new stock. But the best moments were the quiet ones, the evenings when the work was done and they could sit together on the porch, talking or just being silent together. Katherine loved the feel of Yates's arm around her shoulders, the way he would absently play with her hair while they watched the sunset. She loved waking up next to him every morning, seeing his face relaxed in sleep before the worries of the day set in. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world, and the way he made her feel safe and cherished and deeply, profoundly loved. They talked about children, about when they might be ready to start a family. Katherine was nervous, remembering the baby she had lost and the pain that had come with that loss. But Yates was patient, never pushing, always letting her set the pace. "We have time," he would say. "There is no rush. When you are ready, we will talk about it again." In the spring of their second year together, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She felt the familiar symptoms, the nausea and fatigue and tenderness, and at first she was afraid to hope. But as the weeks passed and her body changed, she began to believe it might really be happening. She told Yates one evening as they were getting ready for bed, her voice shaking with a mixture of joy and fear. "I am pregnant," she said simply. "I think I am about 2 months along." Yates froze in the act of removing his boots, then slowly straightened up. His face went through a series of expressions, shock and joy and fear all mixed together, before settling into a smile so wide Katherine thought his face might split. "You are sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Katherine said. "Yates, I am scared. What if something goes wrong again?" Yates crossed to her in 2 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. "Then we will face it together," he said firmly. "But Katherine, I have a feeling about this. I think everything is going to be all right. I think we are going to have a baby, and our lives are going to be even more wonderful than they already are." His confidence was infectious, and Katherine found herself believing him. As the pregnancy progressed, her fears gradually faded, replaced by excitement and anticipation. Her body swelled with the growing life inside her, and Yates treated her like she was made of glass, insisting she rest more and do less around the ranch. Katherine chafed at the restrictions at first, but she could see the fear beneath Yates's protectiveness, the memory of losing his first wife and child, and she tried to be patient. Emma came to stay for the last month of the pregnancy, bringing her oldest daughter to help with the household chores. Katherine was grateful for her sister's presence, for the calm assurance that everything would be all right. When the labor pains started on a cold November night, Emma was there to coach her through, to hold her hand and wipe her forehead and tell her she was doing wonderfully. Yates paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, too nervous to sit still, too worried to be far away. Katherine could hear his footsteps through the door, and the sound was oddly comforting, a reminder that he was there and that she was not alone. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Katherine thought she could not do it, when the pain was too much and she wanted to give up. But then she would hear Yates's voice through the door, asking if she was all right, and she would find the strength to keep going finally. As the afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom windows, Katherine felt the final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry. Emma laughed and cried at the same time as she wrapped the baby in a blanket and placed it in Catherine's arms. "It is a boy," Emma said. "Catherine, you have a son." Catherine looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. He was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. As she stared at him in wonder, the bedroom door burst open and Yates rushed in, his face pale and his eyes wild. "Catherine, are you all right? Is the baby?" He stopped abruptly when he saw them, saw Catherine sitting up in bed with the baby in her arms, and his expression transformed into something Catherine had never seen before. It was joy and wonder and love and relief all rolled into one. "Come meet your son," Catherine said softly, and Yates approached the bed like he was walking on holy ground. He sat down carefully on the edge of the mattress and looked at the baby, reaching out one finger to gently touch the tiny hand. The baby's fist immediately closed around his finger, holding on with surprising strength, and Yates made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked, looking up at her husband. "I was thinking about your father's name," Yates said. "What was it?" "Michael," Catherine said. "Michael James." "Michael James Preston," Yates said, trying it out. "I like it, Michael." They named him Michael, and he became the center of their world. Those first few weeks were exhausting, with the baby waking every few hours to eat and Catherine recovering from the birth. But Yates was there every step of the way, changing diapers and walking the floor with Michael when he cried, taking on extra work around the ranch so Catherine could rest. He was a natural father, patient and gentle and completely devoted to his son. As Michael grew, the ranch prospered. Yates's hard work and careful management paid off, and they were able to hire more hands and expand their herd. Catherine's horse training business brought in additional income, and she gained a reputation throughout the territory as someone who could gentle even the wildest Mustang. They added onto the house, building more bedrooms in anticipation of expanding their family, and planted more trees and shrubs to provide shade and beauty. 2 years after Michael's birth, Catherine gave birth to twin daughters, and the house was suddenly filled with noise and chaos and laughter. The girls, whom they named Grace and Rose, were as different as night and day. Grace was quiet and serious, always watching the world with thoughtful eyes, while Rose was loud and adventurous, getting into everything and keeping her parents constantly on their toes. Yates was in his element with 3 small children, spending every spare moment playing with them and teaching them about the ranch and the land. Michael followed his father everywhere, a miniature shadow who wanted to do everything Yates did. The twins adored their big brother and would toddle after him, calling for him in their baby voices, and Catherine would watch them all together and feel her heart swell with happiness. The years passed quickly, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Michael started school in Coolidge, riding into town with Catherine every morning and riding back in the afternoon. The twins followed a few years later, and the house was quiet during the day but erupted into joyful chaos in the evenings. Yates taught Michael to ride and rope, to read the weather and the land, to be a rancher like his father. Catherine taught the girls to cook and sew, and manage a household, but also to ride and shoot and be independent, because she wanted them to be able to take care of themselves no matter what life threw at them. Emma and Thomas visited often, bringing their children to play with Catherine and Yates's kids. The 2 families grew close, united by blood and love, and the shared experience of building lives in this hard, beautiful country. Mrs. Chen became an honorary grandmother to all the children, spoiling them with treats and stories whenever they came to town. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Katherine with a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children with Emma for 2 weeks. It was Katherine's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach with tears running down her face, overwhelmed by the beauty and vastness of it. Yates held her hand and told her he loved her, that the past 10 years had been the happiest of his life, and Katherine told him the same. They made love in a fancy hotel room with a real mattress and indoor plumbing, feeling like different people in this strange city so far from home. But as wonderful as the trip was, they were both relieved to get back to the ranch, to their children and their life. Because as much as they enjoyed the adventure, home was where their hearts were, in the land they had built together, and the family they had created. More years passed. Michael grew into a tall, strong young man who was the image of his father, with the same gray-blue eyes and quiet strength. He took on more and more responsibility around the ranch, and Yates began to talk about eventually turning the operation over to him. The twins grew into beautiful young women. Grace, with her mother's red-brown hair and serious demeanor, Rose with her father's dark curls and adventurous spirit. When Michael was 20, he married a girl from a neighboring ranch, and Katherine watched her son take his vows with tears streaming down her face. She remembered her own wedding day, the joy and hope she had felt, and she prayed that Michael and his bride would have as much happiness as she and Yates had found together. The twins married within a year of each other, Grace to a lawyer in Tucson, and Rose to a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Huachuca. The house felt empty with all the children gone, but Katherine and Yates found they enjoyed having time to themselves again. They took long rides together across the land they had built, reminiscing about the early days and all the years in between. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on the porch, now gray-haired and weathered but still deeply in love. "Coming back here that day? Choosing me instead of starting fresh somewhere else?" Katherine looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment," she said. "Yates, you and this life are the best things that ever happened to me. Everything I went through before, all the loss and pain, it was worth it because it brought me to you." "I feel the same way," Yates said, reaching for her hand. "That day I found you in the blizzard, I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. I had no idea I was finding the other half of my soul." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the sun set over their land. In the distance, they could see Michael working with his own children, teaching them the same lessons Yates had taught him. The cycle continued, generation after generation, built on the foundation of love and hard work that Katherine and Yates had laid down all those years ago. When Yates died at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep after a long and full life, Katherine mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had had over 35 years together, years filled with love and laughter and the satisfaction of a life well lived. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she knew it. She lived another 5 years after Yates's death, staying on the ranch with Michael and his family, helping to raise another generation of Prestons. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories of the old days, of how she had met their grandfather in a blizzard, and how he had saved her life in more ways than one. She told them about the Wild West they would never know, the hardships and the beauty, and the sense of building something new in an untamed land. On a cold January morning, exactly 40 years after the day Yates had found her stranded on the trail, Katherine died quietly in her sleep. Michael found her in the morning, a peaceful expression on her face and a worn photograph of Yates clutched in her hand. He buried her next to his father on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. The ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the generations, and the story of Katherine and Yates became a family legend. Every Preston child grew up hearing about the blizzard and the broken wagon, about the cowboy who stopped to help, and the love that grew from that first encounter. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we will ever know, and that true love is worth any hardship or sacrifice. The graves on the hill overlooking the ranch became a place of pilgrimage for the Preston family, a spot where they would come to remember the couple who had started it all. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the plains and snow fell thick and fast, people in Coolidge would sometimes tell the story of Katherine and Yates, of how a blizzard brought two lonely souls together and gave them a love that lasted beyond death itself. In the end, it was a simple story about simple people who found each other when they needed it most. But it was also a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness and courage, and the human heart's infinite capacity to heal and hope and love again. Katherine had gone into that blizzard thinking her life was over, that she had nothing left to live for. She had emerged from it with everything she had ever wanted but never known to ask for. A partner who truly saw her, a love that challenged and completed her, and a life that was rich with meaning and purpose. It was the kind of story that reminded people why they fell in love, why they took chances, why they believed in the possibility of happiness even when circumstances seemed dark. And in a land as harsh and unforgiving as the Arizona Territory in the 1880s, that kind of story was worth its weight in gold. The Preston Ranch still stands today, a sprawling operation that covers thousands of acres and employs dozens of people. The original house has been expanded and renovated many times over the years, but the bones of the building that Yates built with his own hands are still there. In the front parlor, there hangs a portrait of Katherine and Yates, painted from a photograph taken on their 25th wedding anniversary. In it, they are older but still vital, standing close together with his arm around her waist and her hand resting on his chest. They are looking at each other rather than at the camera, and the love in their eyes is so clear, so powerful, that it moves everyone who sees it. That portrait is a reminder of where the Preston family came from, of the love that built the foundation on which generations have stood. It is a reminder that the best things in life often come when we least expect them. That help can appear from the most unlikely places, and that true love is worth waiting for, fighting for, and cherishing with every breath we take. Michael Preston, before his own death at the ripe old age of 87, wrote down his parents' story in a leather-bound journal that is now kept in a place of honor in the ranch house. In his careful handwriting, he recorded everything he remembered them telling him about those early days, about the blizzard and the courtship and the building of the ranch. He wrote about his mother's strength and his father's kindness, about the love that had shaped his own understanding of what a marriage should be. The journal ends with these words: "My parents taught me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day." They chose each other in the midst of a blizzard, and they kept choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. That is the legacy they left me, and it is the legacy I hope to pass on to my own children and grandchildren. Choose love, even when it is hard. Choose kindness, even when it costs you. Choose to build something that will last beyond your lifetime. That is what Katherine and Yates Preston did, and the world is better for it. And so the story lives on, passed down through the generations, a reminder of a time when the West was still wild and a blizzard could change the course of two lives forever. It is a story of survival and courage, of hardship overcome and dreams realized. But most of all, it is a love story, pure and simple, about two people who found each other when they were lost and built a life together that was richer and more beautiful than anything they could have imagined alone. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To find someone who sees us truly, who loves us completely, and who chooses to walk beside us through whatever storms life may bring. Katherine and Yates Preston found that in each other, and their story stands as a testament to the enduring power of love in even the harshest of landscapes and the coldest of winters.